Chapter 15. The horizon ringing the sky islands swelled with an otherworldly emerald hue, shepherding dusk to night as Pura, Joshua and Pai huddled shoulder to shoulder, a deer shank crackling on the spit, the only soundtrack to the somber feast. In Link's absence, the women had overseen a complete overhaul of the island, scrounging the abandoned archipelago chain for forgotten debris, glider wings, boards and crate sides, chunks of stone decoration, fashioning it together into what Pura was calling Elden Research Lab Vertical Edition. With Joshua and Pai's eager hands, she'd expanded the crumbling stone barracks house into a fully enclosed shelter, complete with an observation deck facing out toward Hyrule Castle. At the far side of the island, they'd cleared a landing strip for the fan-powered glider, their lifeline to the ground below. Joshua had taken on the role of scout, as the most inconspicuous member of the trio. Once a week, she'd steer the craft down into the brush of the Trilby Valley, tenting it in leaves and branches, keeping it out of any creature's sightlines. Ganondorf's forces were overwhelming but far from exhaustive. There was no way to cover all of Hyrule at once. They studied these blind pockets, the areas his guards must consider the lowest risk, and scuttled within their shadows. From the nearby stables she gathered discarded newspapers, alongside the odd cooking pot or blanket to bless the expanding skybound homestead, things that weren't too likely to be missed. When she returned, they'd read the news together, hunched around the fire like this, a fresh tradition in a new, indefinite existence. In the months since the coronation, there had yet to be anything to smile about, despite the rejoicing tone that Lucky Clover Gazette had adopted in the king's wake. First there had been the bizarre message from Zelda, the warped plea for compliance from her subjects. Then a passing mention of King Sidon's trial and sentencing for traitorous activities, followed the next week by a note of Queen Yona's regrettable passing, buried in a story of some spineless, low-ranking lieutenant's journey to the castle for a pledge of fealty on behalf of all the Vol. Remorseful Zora. With their rise swelled the demand for information on the rogue knight, grave enemy of the kingdom and imprisoner of our beloved queen. The threats now accompanied the rare special thanks to unfamiliar names, stable hands and village patrolmen exalted to instant lordships. They preserved this intelligence in the lab for Link to review on his return, folded back up after they'd read and chewed through every line, break, and quotation to reassemble some version of the truth within. Between Joshua's nervous braid chewing, Pura's low, dark laughter and Pai's pulsating, silent fury, their individual theories coalesced to run a common truth. Ganondorf's grip was tightening, and no one, not even Zelda herself, seemed capable of easing it. Tonight, however, they neglected to mention the terrible news archive. Link's report was enough devastation for them all to stomach. After a long, considered silence, the return Link began with the night in the Temple of Time, and the momentary glimpse of grace tempered by her caveat, as above, so below, everything in balance. The depths were not so easily accessible now, 7 years after the upheaval. After the gloom stopped sputtering from the chasms, they were no longer a threat or curiosity, but more a public nuisance. As a result, in tandem with the restoration projects launched across the realm, Project Patchwork dispatched Hudson Construction to the closest and most immediate craters to the abyss. Wooden scaffolding was doused in concrete and rock, then landscape with trees and flowers and rockwork, along with messages carved for those who would grow to forget. Danger. Tread lightly. This is a chasm site. These efforts, however, had failed to reach the more distant or inaccessible regions. The wounds in the earth left undisturbed up in the Hebra and Lanayru and Eldin Mountains, and the Gerudo Highland. The nooks of Hyrule only glimpsed by gliding in from above, or scaling up sheer rock. The last vestiges of vanishing monsters and soothed collective nightmares. Places known only to wolf packs and Koroks and, in another lifetime, Link. From the temple he made his way west around the River of the Dead, ascending Mount Hylia to the undisturbed entrance at its slope. It was his first journey into Hyrule's underworld in almost a decade, and unlike his first foray chasing after Robbie and the clues to the princess' disappearance, these depths had been kindled back to life. Not just the muted glow of the chain of light roots, but from an alarming hum of activity. Blinding spotlights circled from massive Yiga forts, revealing the giant stalactites and underground mountain ranges that he'd once stumbled through, groping in the endless black. The all-encompassing silence he'd grown accustomed here was also gone, replaced by the low grind and sputtering of machinery. The great central abandoned mine that sheltered the bargainer statue he sought was not abandoned at all, but crackled and sparked like a torch, the furnaces licking up to the skyless above as iridescent fumes outgassed from the tallest spires. The forgotten constructs he had encountered continued their eternal toil, now accompanied by men, shoveling fuel for the flames as their companions hauled in sack after sack of freshly uncovered zonate. It was a scene he'd long imagined from the ancient past, but never dreamed of glimpsing himself as he crept nearer. The remnants of the massive conveyor belt connecting the zonate deposits to the mouth of the mine had been repaired, and now lurched forward, carrying piles of the robin's egg-colored ore. Shelves and carts brimmed with processed charges and batteries, being sorted by Hylians who looked as alarmingly out of place as the spewing chasms first had. The men and constructs were much too preoccupied with their toil to notice Link scuttling below, down into the cavernous basement where the cloaked, four-eyed deity slumbered. As he drew closer to the enormous statue, a low voice rumbled through the chamber like a tremor. "Hero of this realm, you grow older." This observation gave him pause. He hadn't expected an eternal being to note such a relatively minor set of years.
"Time is elastic,"
Zelda used to say, and he'd pretend to understand. "Sit, hero. Speak of what brings you here now, amidst this peace." Link dutifully lowered himself to the dry dirt, fine as sand, below the bargainer's blank stare. He crossed his legs and rested his hands upon his knees. Like a monk deep in meditation, he did take a breath, and then another, centering himself around this one imperative precipitating this journey.
"The peace we brought to Hyrule has been shattered,"
he said.
"The demon king Ganondorf has been free from the sacred realm, and has taken over the throne. The goddess Hylia has sent me to request your help in purging this evil once again."
Goddess Hylia. A blue flicker, like a wisp of lightning, cracked through the bargainer's carved eyes. Link waited helplessly through the expanse of silence before the otherworldly voice addressed him once more. "Tell me, hero, what resurrected monsters enslave this land? What calamity of malice chokes the air away from the living?" Link swallowed against the lump rising in his throat.
"There are no monsters. There's no calamity. This evil takes an ordinary form, only a man and his dark forces."
Evil men, dark forces. These are the judgments of mortals squabbling over vain desire. You oppose the man who has been declared king. Matters of politics are of no concern to me and my brethren.
"But he's captured Princess Zelda,"
Link added, the words sounding flimsy in the wake of this dismissal.
"She's being held there against her will as a prisoner queen."
"And yet she lives while you presume yourself capable of knowing her will. And yet you, yourself, live."
"The goddess can't help us without your blessing. Please,"
he said, sinking forward, pounding his fists into the ground, as if he could shake something loose from the behemoth's stubborn mind.
"I can't stop this. Ganondorf has grown more powerful while I've become less. I can't go back to help Zelda without something, anything to wield against him."
The goddess Hylia will always have a predisposition for tipping fate into her descendants' favor. It is a liability of being so closely tied to mortals. She chooses not to acknowledge the legitimacy of forces that contradict her preferences. We must balance what she might tip. The king you oppose is not a god. You wield the force of death. Hero, the battle above is that of your own desire, not a threat to the divine. Your fate is now your own, hero, and I grow weary of these matters. The hint of light behind the frozen expression faded, and with that, Link's audience vanished back into the void.
"Did you go back to speak to the goddess after you left the depths?"
Pyrrha asked as fat slicked off the meat, bubbling on the kindling below. None of them had asked him about where the bounty had come from. He'd left out the part of the story where he'd taken the long, treacherous way back through the mountain, laying waste to the moblin camp he'd found, massacring the starving creatures one by one as they yelped and scattered, heaving wordless cries of surrender as they waved their arms and tossed down their spindly spears. It was a merciless, conspicuous scene, a bloody footprint on the map they were desperate to keep untraceable. But Link's sorrow was calcifying into fury, and each swipe of the sword was a release, the cleaving of unwanted, abominable flesh, a balm that muffled the bargainer's verdict. He stole the roast right from their fire, their meager ration for 10, a boon for the island quartet. Link shook his head.
Why? There's nothing she can do when she's bound by all things in balance.
Pyrrha bit the inside of her cheek, her charts and patterns failing her against the ambivalence of deities.
I thought she might have some idea of what we should do next. She did, and it was a dead end.
Plotting wasn't in Link's blood. He was born and raised and trained to find the best way through a directive, to arrive at anyone else's desired end in the fastest and cleanest way possible. This aimless plight made him feel untethered, a soldier without a command, a knight without his charge. So many missions to chase the darkness and slay the beast felt effortless now, against this civilized foe, and the sense of the ordinary coalescing around his presence. It wasn't Pyrrha, but the rise of Paye's voice that broke through the defeated reticence.
Then the only way to defeat the Demon King is to make him think that he's already won.
3 pairs of wide, curious eyes snapped to attention at the priestess, and the campfire's reflection glowed beneath her headdress, lending them all a glimpse of her unblinking stare into Link's very soul.
Which means you have to die.
End of Chapter 2.